introduction. I think you covered pretty much everything professionally about me, but just so you all know my background, I grew up, born and raised down in San Diego. I came up here to go to UOP. I never thought I was going to get involved in local government or anything in Stockton. I went to UOP because I wanted to go to a small school, and I was thinking, oh, we're so close to the state capitol. I'll go try to get an internship up there, like Will did at one point, and maybe go get a job up there, and I'll try to work for the party or something. And lo and behold, a local candidate, Michael Tubbs, was basically everything I wanted to be. He was a super young guy, really progressive, running for mayor already. He had elected to council at 22, and needless to say, he just kind of sucked me into the local ecosystem, and that was 10 years ago now. Wow, which is kind of hard to believe. But yeah, so it's almost by complete chance I ended up being here today, but I couldn't have hoped for anything better, honestly. From that day forward, I got to know the community of Stockton. I've lived here now for the last 10 years, and it has been such a wonderful journey, and it's been so cool to see how at the local level, we're really the people who get stuff done. Like when you go through that list of stuff, it's not just a list of dollar values awarded or budgets managed. It's like putting trees in the ground, helping people, saving people money on their bills, actually doing the real work. And that's what I've always wanted to do. So it's been really cool to see all that come to fruition. And yeah, I just can't believe it's been, this long that we've been doing all this work. So looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm going to try to get through the after Nena's slump. But it's very nice to be here on this panel with you. My name is Jasmine Peterson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Climate Action Director at Little Manila Rising. I've had the privilege of working with that organization for 2 years now. And prior to that, I served as a community partner with them through my work with Third City Coalition. I started that organization in 2016 as a way to engage the community and try to bring people together around civic issues and get people to become more aware of how Stockton government works and how to find their place in the community. And I think I'll just say, I'm Stocktonian through and through. I was born and raised here. I went to Stockton schools, go Mustangs. And yeah, I love this community. I've had the opportunity to work in different neighborhoods all over Stockton, from the east side to south side to Brookside West area, all over the city. And I think the work that we're doing through the Transformative Climate Communities really speaks to the need for communities to come together and support one another and bring new ideas to the forefront and try new things and build relationships together. And that's what I'm really all about. And you all are part of that as well. And so I thank you all for being here today. And I'm an open book. So if you have any other questions about me, I'm happy to answer them.
Well, I have plenty of questions for you, Jasmine, so let's get started. Can you share your overall, this will be for Grant as well, but can you both share your overall experience during the planning grant phase of the Stockton Rising project? And Jasmine, we'll start with you.
Okay. So I actually was first learned about the Transformative Climate Communities program back in 2017, I want to say. There was a white paper that was authored by a colleague of ours at Greenlining Institute. The white paper basically said, in a sense, how do we drive community investment by putting community members at in the driver's seat and having them share their lived experience with us and help us understand where these investments need to be guided most. And that from that white paper, the state Strategic Growth Council really developed the Transformative Climate Communities program. And we learned about the opportunity. There were planning grants, there were implementation grants, and from the start, I think we had a champion in Mayor Michael Tubbs, who really understood that we had a lot of the pieces already here in our community. We just needed to have some time and space to put them together, coordinate around these ideas. The need was obviously there. We had many community members over the course of decades in South Stockton who had been activated, engaged in their community. They understood the long history of redlining in the community and wanted to figure out, how do we reverse this? How do we change course? How do we redirect these investments into our parks, into our neighborhoods? How do we reduce the burden that's on our community because of the effects of redlining? And so in the planning grant phase, we originally applied for about $250,000 of grant funds with 10 partners, or excuse me, 7 partners and the city. And it was definitely challenging to figure out how to work closely with the city. We were coming out of the bankruptcy, and you know, a lot of the city staff focus was on stabilizing government, really figuring out how do we come out of that. And the need for community voice was there, but I don't think it was being heard by enough folks. Luckily, we had a lot of support from the city council and the mayor, as I mentioned, that allowed us to apply for those funds. We were successful in achieving them, and we took those funds and actually implemented a pilot tree survey. So we got to survey the canopy and kind of see where the gaps were in our tree canopy. We also piloted the Climate Leaders program for the first time. Shout out to Rising Sun for taking that on. That was a big lift. And honestly, to what Sarah was saying earlier about this work being transformative, it was one of the first times the state and the city had invested in community members being really truly meaningfully participating in a project, having their contributions be valued monetarily, and giving them an opportunity to serve as an ambassador in the community. They're sharing information about our work, but we're also taking information in, and we're really learning from them about how to shape policy, how to shape these projects. And so the Climate Leaders program really was kind of born in that planning grant phase. And then finally, we also created the Sustainable Neighborhood Plan, which has become a model for other local neighborhood scale planning in our community. And so I'll leave it at that, and I'll pass it to Grant to talk more about S&P and other things.
That's pretty much where I came on the scene. It was the end of, I graduated May 2019, and that plan was adopted in October, I think, October 2019.
Yeah,
Would have been 19, yeah.
19.
My introduction was I was just a generic fellow in the city manager's office. I didn't have like a climate focus. I didn't have any focus. It was just, I worked for the city manager's office. So I was doing a bunch of random stuff like taxi cab ordinance updates and all the other stuff that they didn't want to do. And they're like, hey, give it to that kid. He can do it. And one of the things that came across my desk was actually the Sustainable Neighborhood Plan. They wanted someone to do a deep dive on it and read it and kind of make sure it was up to snuff, because I had to go to city council. And my first experience was basically just laying into the document and being like, well, what's the source for this? And where'd this come from? And where's this number? And I just had like 100 comments probably. And I sent it to my boss, who I assumed was going to review it herself. And then she ended up forwarding my edits straight to the author of the document, which led to a very fun conversation. But so I kind of, in reading it, I became very interested in the program itself, obviously, and I was like, oh, this seems like a really interesting project that the city should be pursuing. And I did immediately notice that the city leadership at the time was very hesitant, and they were very worried because of a lot of the things that Jasmine just said, it being owned by the community and driven by the community. People in government tend to be very fearful when it comes to power sharing because we all have a boss, and we don't want to upset our bosses. And if you've got a group of people who can have a lot of power, and that power might lead to upsetting your boss, you're gonna get scared, right? I mean, it's just natural. So my background really allowed me to start being the bridge that we needed in the government side, which was a really cool role to kind of fall into. But because I had known Jasmine for years up to that point, I'd kind of come from more the political side and the nonprofit side. I could kind of be the translator between the two groups and say, like, you don't need to be afraid of each other. We all want the same thing. In fact, we can get millions of dollars for city projects, but the state won't give it to us unless we partner with all these community members and we uplift their projects. So that started to be kind of the mantra that I would go around City Hall. And once that door kind of started to open and they could see the benefit that it would bring to kind of our side of the table, it really opened up the conversation. Obviously, my thought was, why wouldn't we want to do this? I want to help our community and do good things. But sometimes you got to frame it in certain ways to get certain people to get on board, right? So that's where I came on, helping with the S&P. We got it before council. And then literally we went from adopting the S&P in October to starting the application for TCC round 3 in November. And then we finished our application, I want to say it was like March 6th, 2020, like a week before the pandemic. And then, yeah, everything followed from there. So pretty mild amount of work on my end as far as the planning side. but I really came on right when implementation was starting.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much. I think those are a lot of great things that you both shared about your experiences, and a lot of the things that we saw from Jason's presentation, right, came to fruition. But with that, what were some of the most significant lessons that either of you learned during the planning grant that have informed your approach to this work moving forward?
I think we focused a lot on the structure on paper, and we did not focus nearly enough on how we were actually going to do any of the things we were talking about. We had so many long conversations about how the voting structure would work on the steering committee, and how many subcommittees we would have, and who's going to be responsible for this and who's going to do that, and all the while not really diving a lot deeper into the logistics of how are we actually going to get order this many trees, how are we going to find all the sites to put them in, who's going to be really responsible for driving certain things. And contracts, oh my God, the contracting process ended up being a nightmare. So I was just chuckling to myself the whole first 6 months of implementation about how much I was worried about a whole bunch of stuff that did not end up being a problem whatsoever. And all the minutia, administrative stuff became the biggest headache. Anyone who was here back in those starting days can certainly remember how far behind I certainly fell in terms of getting those contracts executed, getting all these new documents in order, getting everyone accustomed to the lengthy review and approval process with the state as far as invoices and stuff goes. So I don't know, I guess lesson learned moving forward from there. Every grant we've applied for since then, I feel like we've paid a lot more attention to the actual details of logistics, who's going to drive that, who's going to be the project manager, and just being a little more focused on that. But I think it was important to go through the exercise because it was the first time, like Jasmine said, where the community was really taking leadership. So that's why it became such a talking point. And I guess I was sort of pleasantly surprised to see that it didn't end up being the problem we thought it would in terms of some of those things that we were worried. At least I didn't see it on my end.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, no doubt, the administrative capacity building that needed to happen, I think for every organization that's been part of the project. It's been a big lift, but I think the biggest lesson that I've learned coming out of that is the relationship building is really important, and that it takes time, and it takes, the good news, I'm thinking back on, how everyone was feeling during the planning grant, and I think there was a ton of energy there to work with the community, to lift up the voices of our communities and have them dream about and tell us what these investments could and should look like. But it's really humbling to implement on that, and it's hard, and we start to go into folks' homes and we start to really see the realities that they're dealing with on a daily basis, and we start to gain a better understanding and better context of why things are the way they are and why they've been this left undone or incomplete for so long. And so I think for me, the relationships that we've built as partners has been really formative for me, and it helps us understand, how do we partner better, how do we communicate better as we move forward. The other thing I would say is on the climate leaders, just going back to that, because I feel like that is such an important part of the work that we're trying to do here, is really elevate climate literacy, help people to understand and make connections between the environment that they're living in, their daily health struggles, and the positive change that can happen in the middle there. I really feel like the climate leaders play a valuable role, and we've seen folks grow from that into other fields like community health workers, or even taking on roles within their agencies that translate more community input into their work. So yeah, I think those are the big takeaways for me.
All right, awesome. So with that, let's go into some ways that the work and strategies that were developed during the planning grant helped shape or were carried over into the implementation grant. And I have heard you both talking about the climate leaders, for example, but maybe if there's other aspects of the planning grant that were developed that you see carried over and really making an impact in the community.
Well, I just want to just speak to something Grant mentioned earlier, which was the timing of all of this.
Oh,
It was so surreal. Like we approved the Sustainable Neighborhood Plan. The city adopted that in late 2019, and then we were immediately pivoting and going forth into writing the implementation grant in, I want to say it was like February, March, and we were notified, obviously right as COVID was happening, we were notified that we would need to do a site visit to kind of bring all these partners and state agencies into the community. And so we held that virtually, and we showcased all the different projects over Zoom, and that was a huge challenge.
I think it was like 160 slides or something. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it was many slides, many partners, but it was really fun. And I think what I want to say about it is the engagement that we had in round 3 was definitely shaped by COVID. And I think everyone who's here knows, if you were part of the team during this time, all those plans and dreams that we had built around the block parties and the summits, like that had to change midway through as we're implementing. And so what I think came out of that's shaped implementation, and you all are a testament to this, is our ability to pivot and adapt. As we learn and as we kind of go on through our project, we're taking in information, we're adapting to the changing climate, literally and also politically, and we're figuring out how do we meet people where they are, how do we bring these investments to them, and I think it's made us all a lot stronger because of it, because people have gotten very creative in implementing this work. And so I just want to just acknowledge that and say that I think that's shaped how we've implemented, is we've persisted through many, many adversities and, just tried to have fun along the way too, so.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too nerdy and technical, but basically the S&P was the major outcome of the planning grant in terms of a literal document that we were going to base our implementation grant on. But the S&P didn't say, here's a neat list of projects that are organized in the exact way that the state wants. It was very broad concepts of what people were looking for, which is really good. And we had a lot of data to back it up, which is what we really needed. But the mad dash that Jasmine's basically describing was, we went from, great, people told us what they want, to we have to turn that into a list of projects that are allowable in this lengthy, 100 guidelines released by TCC. And we basically did that within 12 weeks, I think, or 10 weeks, it was really, really short. And so it's a direct line, straight from planning to implementation. Every project, I always like to talk about my little upside down pyramid when we were deciding our projects. It's the same kind of logic I apply to every grant we apply for, which is I always try to define your box of possibilities, right? Your broadest band at the top of ideas is what does the grant allow? Your next band down is going to be, what aligns most with your priorities, in this case the S&P. The next band down, what do you think is going to be most competitive, because you have to win the money, you want the money, and then that kind of gets you to your final list of projects, right? So what does this allow? What are our priorities? What do we think can win? And let's go and let's get after it. And that's basically what we did. And that came up with a short list of projects that I don't actually think we had to cut any projects. I think we just applied whatever that final list was. We were struggling to add up to 28.2 million, because that's how much it was supposed to be worth. And then when we were awarded the grant, we technically we didn't tie. I think we lost by 0.2 points or something out of 100 and something points. But the gracious SGC folks in the room decided to split the money between Riverside and Stockton, which was awesome. So we ended up with a partial grant for the 10.8 million. So then at that point, we had to make some tough calls about which projects to include. But yeah, it's kind of the framework I use for most grants. It can be helpful in terms of kind of defining the possibilities, because you get a lot of people are going to come into the room and say, well, I want this and we want that. It's okay, let's get back to our roots. What can we really do here that's going to, bring home the bacon? Yeah,
I just want to follow up on that. I think going back to the earlier question about challenges that we faced during those early days, I think the engagement, the missed opportunity to engage more deeply with city staff, we've built a lot of bridges through this project, but to Grant's point, that document was always, initially intended to be a community partnership with city staff, but obviously through the course of implementation, we weren't super successful at getting them on board. And I think that that's a really important lesson for us as practitioners in the room, as folks who care about community, coming from maybe a nonprofit lens, is that sometimes folks won't be on board with you. Don't give up. Like, keep working at it. Find the common ground that you can, where you all align, and then run with that and build the relationship so that it can evolve, which is what ultimately ended up happening. We ended up getting another award, thankfully, to complete our project and really more deeply invest in the way that we originally intended. But yeah, I think, the Sustainable Neighborhood Plan was originally, it was supposed to be more deeply informed by the city's capital improvement plan. So what were the things that the city was already having in the works? What were the investments in infrastructure that they knew were already on the table? And how do we align that? And I think in the end we did get there. It was a lot more challenging than it needed to be. So,
It was a really fun Christmas.
yeah, we worked all over all the Christmas break. So yeah.
All right, awesome. So with that, we'll go into our final question, which is, what are some key insights or takeaways from your involvement with the SNP that may be of value or would be valuable for future community-based initiatives?
Yeah, I feel like we kind of just answered that. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Jasmine, and I think we're in such a different place now that staff would be a lot more interested to participate. And honestly, I was more shocked that the city was willing to leave so much on the table. I mean, I kept going back to my boss like, hey, we could do more projects. And no, this is a community thing. I don't want ownership. I'm like, okay, I mean, sure. I was happy to fund their projects. But I think getting more alignment, because the way you just have to understand how everyone thinks about things like strategically. Cities think about things in terms of general plans and capital improvement plans, right? Like, they have these big documents that they're required by law to update and to do regularly. So that's their mindset. So when you come around talking about some S&P, they're like, what the heck is that? Like, what do you mean sustainable neighborhood? Like, which neighborhood?
All the neighborhoods, sustainable.
So you gotta kind of translate to the vernacular so people kind of get where you're coming from. And I think, yeah, if we had aligned it a little more in terms of general plan and CIP stuff into the S&P, like if staff had been willing to show up and talk about how we could have done that, I think it would have made for a much more interesting list of projects at the end that we were missing. But yeah, other than that, I think honestly you face all the same challenges we all know about, right? I mean, it's hard to reach people. It's hard to find people where they're at. You got to think of creative ways to get after it. I'm kind of old school in terms of, I remember in the campaign days just knocking on doors, right? Sometimes you just got to find people where they're at and bug them for a few minutes and get their perspective. But yeah, I think we kind of already talked about most of the stuff. Yeah.
I just want to say, I know that there were a handful of folks within city staff who were very engaged. I just want to folks from Public Works, folks from the city manager's office, as I mentioned, folks from the mayor's office at the time, they were very engaged in the work, and they did make a good effort of trying to get us connected. So I just want to, not everyone was unwilling, but for me, I think some of the things around the Sustainable Neighborhood Plan, one, I knew early on, so just a little background. So the things that informed the Sustainable Neighborhood Plan was, our general plan, the capital improvement plan, although it didn't translate to a list of projects or a menu of projects, but it did inform that. And also our climate action plan. At the time, that climate action plan, for those of you that don't know the history, the climate action plan was a document, it was a 650-page lovely document that outlined a bunch of strategies for
it's good weekend reading.
Yeah, for improving the city's climate impacts, and it was supplemental to the updates that happened in the general plan. By the time we were writing the Sustainable Neighborhood Plan, that data was from 2011. So it was already out of date. And I think what we learned is that we really do, in addition to community voice, you also need good, accurate data about the conditions that you're starting from, your baseline. And so it's been many years coming, but we're finally updating our climate action plan again. And that process is happening now. And so I would just say, you know, having good information to go off of and plan from is key. And being part of those processes can really take you down a journey that you didn't expect. Like when I came into this work, I wasn't anticipating being part of public processes in the way that I have become. But I think community input in those spaces is very valuable. And so I would just say, like, being part of the process is really helpful. And you're serving your community already, but you know, you can take that knowledge and insight that you've gained through your positions and leverage it by continuing to provide more information.
Well, and to add to that, I think data can be really powerful because facts, well, at least they didn't used to be, particularly biased. And I think even though you can present data in a biased way, I do think presenting the situation and just like a straight up, like, this is happening whether you want to believe it or not, can get a lot more people to the table and a lot more like commitment from folks, because to me, like, the cap is just another tool decision makers can use to weigh their decisions. Because the data is out of date, they don't have a very accurate way of knowing the balance of what they're choosing, right? Stockton's basically just a long story of choosing between economic development and the environment, right? You look at South Stockton, they prioritized economic development. And that was, you know, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes along with that I don't have time to get into. But suffice to say, it's going to keep being the same problem, right? New warehouses, new businesses that may not be healthy for the community, but they provide money, you know, for the budget. So I think when we get more data, we can make these planning documents into accountability tools, so that the public can show up and say, hey, you committed to reducing GHG emissions by 20%. Well, this project you're about to approve is going to set us back 10%. Like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. And at least there's a real context to like weigh that decision, instead of just some vague, like, this is bad for the environment, right? Like, how bad? How significant is this going to be? And I think that's why those things can be really important. And looking back at the S&P days, it would have been awesome if we had had an updated cap that really had all that data that we could have incorporated into it and made it a little more real about, like, these are what these projects are going to do for us. Yeah.
I think I'll just share one more thought on this. Is just the workforce development component of all of this work is so important. Like, having folks from our communities really meaningfully being engaged through employment or through programs like, you know, the Advocate program, the Youth Advocates, or the Dawn Advocates, or the Climate Leaders, whatever that may look like, whether it's like a very part-time, flexible engagement, or it's your full-time job. I think, to Grant's point about economic development being prioritized, it doesn't have to be either or. Right. Look at this project. We've created dozens of jobs, well-paying jobs for people in our communities who are here taking care of our community. That is an economy in and of itself, and we have the potential to do even more. And so I just want to say that, you know, from my point of view, the Transformative Climate Communities represents $35 million of investments. We know we've generated at least $65 million total of additional investments outside of TCC. Our port has received over $100 million of investments. How do we continue to stay engaged? How do we continue to drive these investments in ways that serve our communities, meet the environmental goals we have, but also provide opportunity, economic opportunity for those that are here? That's the question that is still before us, and you all are part of that as well. But yeah, that's what I think we have to take away from all of this.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Grant and Jasmine, for your insight and your sharing your experiences from planning to implementation. Really quickly, I'd like to just ask all of our tabling partners to kind of go ahead and get ready and set up your stations. We're about to go into the tabling station section of our agenda today, so just want to give you some time to just get yourselves settled in those spaces while we take questions and Q&A from our audience. With that, we'll open up the Q&A section and raise your hand if you'd like to ask Jasmine or Grant any questions related to their work on either the implementation or the planning the planning or implementation grants for Stockton Rising. All right, Hector has a question.
So we finished round 4, round 5. So the big question is there a round 6?
I'm just going to put a quick asterisk. We actually finished round 3 and we're finishing up round 4, so it would actually be a round 5, right? Or no, wait, we skipped round 5.
All right, I'm just going to confuse everybody. We were awarded round 3 initially, and then round 4 is what we're currently implementing. I believe there was a round 5 that's already happened, but we're in the middle of implementation, so we didn't apply for it. And my understanding is that we're ineligible for future funding unless they change the rules. The only reason, we're actually, I think, the only city, or one of 2 of the only cities that have ever been given 2 implementation awards, and that was because our first one was split. So the only silver lining of COVID as far as TCC goes is we ended up with $6.8 million more than we would have. We applied for 28.2, we got 10.8, and then the next round they upped it from 28.2 to 35, so they let us go for the full 35. And that's how we ended up with what we have. So I know that was kind of confusing, but my answer to you is go lobby the state. Let us get more money. We will apply if we are allowed.
Well, you heard it first from Grant. Go lobby. Are there any other questions from the audience related to the planning or the implementation grant process? All right, we have a question in the back. Damaris. I will repeat the question because I can hear you pretty well, so I'll repeat it.
No, so it had to be the exact same project area. Yeah. Yeah, so our priority when we got the second time we won was to fund all the things that we had to cut back when we were given a partial award. So the best example of that's actually the bus program. In our original application, we were going to buy 4 buses if we were awarded the 28.2 million. That quickly got scaled back to 0 because a single bus was going to cost about $1.1 million. And I just couldn't justify 10%, 20% of our entire award going toward like a bus or 2. So RTD, being ever gracious, was totally understanding, and they got it, and they actually ended up getting more money for a workforce program. So we kind of traded some things here and there. So all I was trying to say is when we got the next round of funding, those were the things we wanted to go back to and say, hey, we can fund these now, we got more money. So that's how they're acquiring the bus. And I think it was like more tree plantings or something. Like we basically just had to like scale everything back when we got the partial award. So with round 4 money, we were able to ramp everything back up, actually beyond what we had originally planned. So that's why we were really excited to get it.
I think what I heard from that is that we should all ride the bus because that is $1 million vehicle. And we can all say that we're riding $1 million vehicles, is what I'm hearing. All right, I think we have one more question.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making the time. The work of the sort of planning work, I think, lives on through a structure that's called the Regional Climate Collaboratives. It's led through the San Joaquin Council of Governments, and many of our TCC partners are part of that work as well. So I think if you're really interested in continuing to figure out how do we build more sustainable neighborhood plans for other parts of our county and our community and the region. Definitely get involved in that work. With regard to the Transformative Climate Communities programs, I know I can't speak for other programs, but for us, we've really leveraged this investment to go after other public funds so that we can continue to do our work. And when I say we, I'm talking about the teams at Little Manila Rising. I think there is still some opportunity to figure out how do we embed this work in other existing institutional structures. And to your point about connecting with educational institutions, at scale, it's a huge city. We have 4 or 5 school districts in Stockton. We have been able to build some partnerships with the County Office of Education, have a department around environmental literacy, and we have been able to engage with them. They engage teachers in additional professional development, and they're helping to educate teachers and folks in the classrooms about the sustainable development goals. They're trying to connect it to the work that we do. It is challenging, just working with youth in schools. There are barriers, unfortunately, for us to get into those spaces, but we have been able to build partnerships with folks. I know, like, for example, the Edible Schoolyard Project, they have students come on their site, and so I think we're trying to figure out what that could look like still. But yeah, thank you for your question.
Yeah, I think the 2 parts of that. So the first part about sort of longevity, I definitely think that we put a lot of recurring long-term solutions onto these one-time funding sources, which can be very attractive in the moment because it sounds great. We want to plant trees, we want to do all this maintenance. But to your point, what happens when the grant money runs out? How are we going to pay for all these things that we just did? So I think the state does its best to try to ensure that cities actually leverage their own money so that they are bought into these projects, and it's not just grant funding comes and then it goes and then these things all fall apart. But to be honest, when you're in a situation like Stockton where your budget is just so tight and we really just don't have a lot of resources, there are some times where you just have to say that this is grant funded and it's going to keep going as long as we can keep winning more grants. But if we didn't, then it would be in serious jeopardy of not happening. So there are other ways to address that. There can be local measures that can provide funding for certain things. Historically, Stockton's really only funded public safety and then libraries and Parks and Rec or something. We have 2 or 3 active measures right now, but so that could be interesting. Perhaps in the future, something for trees, perhaps maintenance and all that could be cool. But at the moment, yeah, there are really no recurring funding sources. So that's something we really want to be on the lookout for. We try to advocate to the council that these things are important, but there is a long list of projects that we would love to do if we had the money. I think our deferred maintenance in the city is over $1 billion. It's pretty severe, the amount of work we need to do. So don't want to be doom and gloom, but I think it's important to be straight up about the problem. And the problem is we do need to find those recurring sources, and that's another reason why building that green economy that Jasmine mentioned is so important. Bringing more revenue and sustainable jobs here that can fund the development of those projects is really important. And then, yeah, as far as engaging more youth, I would, like Jasmine said, it's just very difficult when it comes to dealing with the school districts sometimes to get access, although we do have different ways of doing that in the city. We actually have a grant-funded program that I'm super excited to be kicking off in a few weeks, where we bring 100 high school kids into the city to work for 6 weeks, and we put them in all the departments throughout the city. We pay them $23 an hour, 30 hours a week. I know there's a lot of people in here that are like, I didn't have that. I'm sorry I wasn't here 10 years ago, but or that the state didn't fund it earlier, but they do give us money to do that program. I think it's really important to make sure that kids have an opportunity to take a leadership role in their own city and realize that all these things that they've enjoyed their whole lives in parks and aquatic centers and all these things that government supports, the actual work that goes into making that stuff happen, right? It doesn't, the pools don't just open themselves. There's got to be people that run them. So I think that's really important, and I think teaching folks to take responsibility, for our own community is really important, right? A lot of the issues we see, if we could have more of a groundswell of community activism, I think we could solve a lot more waste diversion and a lot of these things that we see happening, which are really unfortunate. I think it's important, when kids grow up, they get assemblies and stuff that teach them about, responsible stewardship and our environment and how detrimental it is when all this stuff ends up in the river. And yeah, I think we're always willing to open our doors. I know that. I mean, it's really cool to go take kids up to see the water intake center. It's actually in between Stockton and Lodi. There's a 14-mile pipeline that goes all the way out to the Delta to bring water in to be treated. And they have a filtration system to get all the garbage out. It is pretty jarring to see how much garbage ends up in the Delta, just from, people who are out there, fishing or doing whatever they're doing. So anyway, that was a long-winded answer. But I think there's a lot of stuff we could be doing. I would love to do. If there's any other educators, more people in the room that want to try to open those doors, then we should talk.
I'll just also give a plug. We will be at Children and Youth Day Saturday at Pixie Woods. So we're going to be engaging with hopefully lots of youth and their parents on Saturday.
All right, so with that concludes this section of our agenda. Thank you so much, Jasmine and Grant, for your responses, and thank you everyone for your answers. With that, we can